What if the single biggest reason people struggle with money isn't what we think? What if it's because our whole lives we're taught to work for money, but we never learn how to make money work for us? Okay, let's dive into this huge idea from Robert Kiyosaki's classic, Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
And this whole idea is probably best understood through a story. A story from when Kiyosaki was just a 9-year-old kid, and it all started with a simple and, well, a very illegal business plan.
So picture this. Young Robert and his best friend Mike get left out of a trip to a beach house because their families weren't rich. They were the poor kids. And right then and there, they get fed up and decide, that's it, we're gonna get rich. They just had to figure out how.
So after brainstorming all morning, it hits them like a bolt of lightning. Why earn money when you can just make it? Yeah, their big idea was to literally manufacture their own currency. And you gotta give them credit, their plan was surprisingly detailed. They set up this whole production line right in the driveway. They went around collecting the raw materials, these old lead toothpaste tubes, and started melting them down over hot coals, pouring the molten lead into little plaster molds shaped like nickels.
So, just as their little factory is hitting full stride, Robert's dad pulls into the driveway, and with this gentle smile, he sits the boys down and explains what the word counterfeiting means. And just like that, their business was over. Completely illegal.
But here's the thing. Instead of scolding them, Robert's dad, who he calls his poor dad, was actually super proud of them. He loved that they took initiative. But he told them, look, I don't know how to make money. For that, he said, you need to go talk to Mike's dad, the man who would become known as Rich Dad.
All right, so the boys go to Mike's dad and ask him flat out, will you teach us how to get rich? He agrees. But his first lesson, it's a bit of a strange one. He makes them an offer that was really more of a test.
He offers them a job at one of his convenience stores. The work? Dusting cans for 3 hours every Saturday. And the pay? Get this, a measly 10 cents an hour. I mean, even back in the 1950s, that was next to nothing. But they wanted to learn, so they took the deal.
So after 3 weeks of boring, tedious work, missing their softball games, and earning just enough to buy a comic book or two, Robert had had enough. He felt like a total slave. He was angry, and he was ready to quit and give Rich Dad a piece of his mind.
But here's the twist. That moment of anger, that's exactly what Rich Dad was waiting for. The boys had just passed the first test, and now the real lesson, the one that had nothing to do with 10 cents an hour, was about to start.
Rich Dad explained that the low pay was totally intentional. He wanted them to get frustrated. He told them, I decided to let life push you around a bit so you could hear me. The whole point was for them to realize that he wasn't the problem. The problem was how they chose to react.
And then he asked them to think about something bigger. What is it that keeps most adults stuck in jobs they hate year after year for paychecks they know are too small? Well, the answer, he said, boils down to 2 really powerful, really human emotions.
First up is fear. You know, the fear of not having money to pay your bills? That fear gets you out of bed in the morning and gets you to a job. But then, once you get that paycheck, a second emotion kicks in, desire. You start thinking about all the cool stuff you can buy. And this dance between fear and desire, well, that creates a powerful trap.
And this trap, this whole pattern of being controlled by fear and desire, is what Rich Dad famously called the rat race. And this is the key insight, right? People's entire lives get dictated by the size of their paycheck. They react emotionally. They feel fear, so they go to work. They feel desire, so they spend. But most people never stop to think, hey, is there a better way to do this? And you can see this endless loop in action. Fear makes you get a job. Desire makes you spend your paycheck. But now you need even more money to keep up with your new lifestyle, so that fear comes back even stronger. So you look for a raise or a better job just to start the whole cycle over again, but with bigger bills.
So, to teach them how to get out of this trap, Rich Dad hits them with a new offer. He tells them to keep working at the store every Saturday, but this time for 0 pay. Nothing. He wanted to force them to stop thinking about a paycheck and start using their brains to spot an opportunity.
So for 3 more weeks, these 2 kids worked for free. It was tough, but then, by breaking out of that work for a paycheck mindset, something finally clicked. They started to see something that everyone else was missing. One day, Robert spots the store manager, Mrs. Martin, doing something kind of weird. She's tearing the front covers off the old comic books that didn't sell. She'd send the covers back to the distributor for credit, and then just toss the rest of the book into a box to be thrown out.
And bam, an idea was born. They asked the distributor if they could just have the old comics. He said, sure, as long as they didn't resell them. So what did they do? They opened a comic book library in Mike's basement. They charged other kids 10 cents admission, and for that, they could read as many comics as they wanted for 2 hours. It was a total bargain.
And the business was a huge hit. Over 3 months, they were averaging $9.50 a week in pure profit, and that was after paying Mike's sister $1 a week to be the librarian. See, they had created an asset, a business that was making money for them even when they weren't physically there. That was lesson number 1.
This whole experience just perfectly lays out the two different philosophies, doesn't it? Poor Dad's thinking was all about job security and working for that paycheck. Rich Dad's philosophy was about financial education, learning to see opportunities, and creating assets that work for you.
And that really brings us to the main question of this whole story, the one we have to ask ourselves. Are we just running in that rat race, being pushed around by fear and desire, or are we actively looking for ways to build assets and maybe, finally, have our money start working for us?
Hey, thanks for checking out this explainer. If you got something out of this and you want more deep dives into these kinds of life-changing books, definitely make sure to subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.